Okay, there we go. Right, okay, so we're talking about how we would, once we've got our casting back in metal, how we would start to go about sort of finishing it. So there's sort of, if we were casting it at graze, the first step that we would do is to first of all get it off the tree, the main tree, and then we're going to clean up. There'll be some investment on it. So I've got this little model here, which I'm going to use to show you. Is you can see how I sprued it. This one had 2 sprues attached to it. And so this is what we're sort of going to use as our demo. I've also, fortunately, I have a tree in silver from one of my previous castings. This is what the tree looks like with the models cut off. So that's in silver. So first of all, you would use sprue cutters, most probably, to cut them off the main tree. If the sprue cutter wasn't big enough, then you would need to use your saw to get it off the main tree. Then what we'd be doing is saw piercing. But first of all, so we've got it off the main tree, and what often happens is that it, like, especially if you've got a design that's very textured and detailed, you'll find that the investment itself, which is the plasters like substance, will sort of sit in all the grooves, and you want to get rid of that first so that it's nice and clean. So the best way that we would do that at the uni is to use the sandblasting cabinet. That is what they would use in industry. So if you were outsourcing your castings, you would get it back all clean, because they would use the sandblaster to get rid of the investment. At Grays, the sandblaster is in the back corner of the ceramics workshop. I know that you guys have not been in the workshops yet, but it's sort of a big box. It's got 2 circles for the armholes that you go in, sort of. I'll point it out when you're next in. But so you would use that first, clean it all up. Then it's a case of de-spruing. So we've got the model and we want to get rid of the sprues. So it's a bit strange me telling you this process, not having shown you any other processes in metal in the jewelry workshop, because finishing and polishing is like all the last thing that you do. So it's sort of like combining different things with like the sawing and that, and you would do it last. So I'm sorry if this is all a bit rushed and it's like lots to take in. But anyway, so first of all, we're going to saw pierce. So I've got my saw frame, and unlike for the wax where we have the spiral blade, this one we need a saw blade for piercing metal. So it's a bit different, and you can't really see it, it's too tiny. It's got little teeth in it. And for your standard one, like we spoke about before, is going to be a 2/0. However, the sprues are quite thick, so you might find that a bigger saw, bigger teeth might be better, because you often find that when you're de-spruing, you can eat through your saw blades as it goes through. But anyway, so we've got a bench peg. I place it at the end of the V, and it's the same as before. So a gentle up and down movement. I've got a firm grip of it, and I'm basically just trying to cut it off as close to the model as I possibly can without cutting into the model. So that will save me time with filing. Probably should have started this cut beforehand, but we'll go for it. Nearly there. So I've cut that off as close as I can to the model itself. And then what I would do is then I would move on to files. So my aim with the sprue is that it is completely disguised and that nobody can tell where it was sprued. So I would then move onto my files, but these are my metal files. So then they're different from the set of wax files that we had. And I would just start smoothing it away. So I'd have, if you've not done filing before, you just have like a firm grip of it and just sort of keep it at the bench peg when you're filing. I often see people doing air filing and just sitting at their bench and doing this. Keep it sort of secure, and then it keeps you'll get through it quicker. Also, the file mainly works in the forwards motion. So I'd be going through like this. You'll find that it's totally different from the wax because the wax was so much softer. The metal, I've got to put a lot more pressure into it, keep a firmer grip. It's just a different material. So we can see that that's starting to blend in. So I would keep working with the file first until it was all blended. And then after the file, then I would move on to wet and dry. So wet and dry sandpaper sticks. With wet and dry, there are different grades. So the lower the number, so like a grit 240 is very gritty. And then the higher the number, so up to like 1,000 or 1,200 plus, is really fine. So you would start at your lower number and then you would work your way up, sort of stopping at the finish that you wanted. But if your aim was like super shiny, like mirror polish, then you would work through all of the grades. I tend to sort of skip them. So I might pick 2 or 3. So I might pick my like 320, 500, 800. Just depends on the finish I want. So I have, this is a case where you would make your own tools. You can buy these pre-made, but also you can just make them yourself. So I have my pot of them in different sizes. So some of them I have as circles, sort of round bits of dowel, and others are square. And then I've got my different grades on them. And then I would sort of take this and start to scrub it. Unlike the files, it works in both directions. So I would just go to town on it, really. Wet and dry. So wet and dry, so they work wet and dry, and it's sort of personal preference, up to you how you'd rather work them. I find personally if I've made the sticks like this, I will use them dry. But if I had like, I might have a completely flat surface and I want it to be really flat. So I would put a bit of wet and dry on my desk surface, and I would sort of scoot it round, sort of like in a circle or a figure of 8. And in that case, I would probably add a bit of water and just make it a bit wet, so it's sort of gliding through a little bit easier. So yeah, that's wet and dry. You can also have that on the pendant motor. So we spoke about this one before, how there's loads of different attachments for it. You can get stuff, pre-bought ones like these, which come in different grits. It's a bit blurry, but so different colours mean different grits. But you also get, which we have more so at Grays, is the I can't think of the name of the attachment, but just the stick is like a Y, so it's got a slot in the top, and then you would cut a strip of wet and dry, stick it in, wrap it round, and use that on the motor, so it gets it so much faster. But obviously it's more suitable for the smaller things that you've got. If you had a large piece, then that wouldn't really cut it. You just need to spend the time on it, and go for it by hand. Where was I? So yeah, so you've got it on there, wrapped it round. Yeah, so the positive thing about that is that, like, you can then take off that bit of wet and dry and swap it with the next grade, and sort of go through it, because you'll find that the wet and dry will not, like, it's not going to last forever. Like it will deteriorate and get eaten up, and depending on your model, like, depends on how quick it gets eaten up as such. Oh, hold on, I just seen I've got someone in the waiting room. Okay. Yeah, so that depends. You would use the different types of wet and dry. You would work through from your low grade to your higher grade, and get it all cleaned up. And I really wouldn't. It's easy to forget about the wet and dry stage and be like, I don't need it, but it is worthwhile. Definitely worthwhile to go through. Just checking my notes. Yeah, so then back to the pendant motor. There are different attachments that go in it, like we spoke about before, that help with the cleanup and help with the type of finish that you're after. So we've got certain. So this one that I've got it in it at the moment is called a radial disc, and it's a bit like a brass brush attachment. Unfortunately, I don't have any brass brush attachments at home, but that is one of the ones that you would use the most, and it's really good for cleaning up all the textured bits and sort of getting in all the sort of nooks and crannies. So these again come in different grades, so different grits, and sort of you choose which one is that you're needing the most, really. So yeah, these come in, like, that's another one that's sort of not been used quite as frequently as this one. Yeah, so then once we filed, wet and dry, cleaned it up, after all of that, then we would think about how we're polishing it. So polish is like the very last stage. In jewelry, there's a few things that you would say this is the last stage, and so is it some things that do have to go in a certain order, other things it doesn't particularly matter. Another thing would be, you would say that stone setting would be the last stage. Also polishing would be the last stage. So it's sort of, for that you would sort of probably polish it as much as you possibly could before you would set the stone. But anyway, I'm missing the point. So polishing. So polish, there is a few different types of compounds that we use, which again are different grits, and they help us to get the nice shine on it. So at Grays, obviously we have the pendant motors, and these tools can be used here, but we also have a big a larger buffing polishing unit, which is at the back of the downstairs workshop. I will say this to you guys again when you're in the building, but using that buffing polishing unit you need to take care. Like, you need to put your goggles on whenever you use it, tie your hair back, and the way you hold the piece is so important, because you could break a finger or lose a finger, and obviously you don't want that. So, but we'll get to that when we're in the building. Okay. But in terms of polishing and the compounds, sort of, so we have the different mops. So this is a little guy. The first compound that I would use, and that we have at Grays, is called Tripoli, and it's sort of brown in colour. That one's more gritty, so I would use Tripoli first, and then after that I would swap mops. So I would aim not to contaminate my mops with the different compounds, and then I would go on to Rouge. So this is what a compound would look like. This is a Rouge compound, it's sort of red in colour. It's a block bar. Also, when you're polishing, you would have your goggles on, obviously, and you would most probably have a face mask on. Don't really want to be breathing it all in. So you would pop this guy in here. And then I'm not going to turn it on just now, but you would just gently pick up a tiny bit. If it's normal when you're polishing for the piece to sort of turn black and look muddy, that is the polishing compound. But if it's just the whole thing's turning black, then it just means you've picked up too much compound. It doesn't need a lot. It would just be like a quick, like, doop, and that's it, with it turned on. But anyway, if you did have a lot of black compound on it after you've done all your polish, then you would go to the sink and clean it off by just using a toothbrush and some washing up liquid. So just gently scrubbing it so that it wasn't going to affect it. Another tool whilst we're here at the sink that we often use is a brass brush. So we talked about brass brush attachments, but this is the brass brush itself. Very handy, use it a lot. But if you go to brass brush after you've polished, then you'll basically be removing it because it's a bit coarser. So you would do that first. And this is also handy if you didn't have a sandblasting cabinet, for example, to remove all the investment once it's finished casting, then you would be needing to have it at the sink, going to town, scrubbing it with a brass brush, it would be your best bet. Also the toothbrush and washing up liquid, I would say, can clean it up quite nicely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's most of what I wanted to say to you over here at the bench. I'll come back round to the side so we can have more of a quick chat and that. Let me swap places. Okay. I'll remove spotlight. Okay. Don't know if that's worked, but anyway. How do we all find that? I know I just kind of like blah, 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 but does that kind of make sense? What are we thinking? Yeah? Okay. Okay, good. Is there any questions at this stage? No? Okay, cool. Whilst we're here then, if everybody's still on board, I just want to briefly mention about multiples. I don't want to go into depth on this. I just want to say it whilst we're here. So it's sort of in the back of your mind as this is a possibility or this is what happens. So you might have found that with some of your designs, like you spent a really long time carving, and that economically, in order to get more of them, it wouldn't make sense to carve each one individually, or whatever may be. What tends to happen in industry is you would then make a mold of that model. So you can make molds from waxes themselves, or you can make, more standardly, you would make the mold from the metal. So there are two types of molds, a hot mold and a cold mold. And so I just wanted to show you what they sort of look like, and just so that you had them in your mind. So this is what we call a vulcanized rubber mold. Both of them are rubber. And so inside, this is where we would use the injection wax. So we would use the wax injector and heat that up, and then that would be our wax model. And then I would take that out and then inject it again, and then be able to create multiples of that design. This one is a cold mold. So this is silicone rubber, cast in one piece, that is then using a scalpel is cut in half. So these are the two halves, sort of kind of hard to see being transparent, but there's so I've cut out registration marks. So I've got sticky out bits, and then it will correlate to in bits so that I can ensure that the mold locks together nicely. And again, I would use the wax injector, inject it, let it cool, let it set, open it, release it, and then get my next multiple. That is a whole other process, whole other technique, but I really think it's handy knowing about it. And then if you're interested, then we can sort of chat more about it next year, or if you want it in 4th years or whatever. Is there any questions about that?
You said it was hot and cold. What's the difference? I guess because you had the rubber mold and then the silicone mold, but both of them got hot wax. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So it's about the way the mold itself is made.
Right.
So the hot one is made from a heat press to sort of compact it and push it together, and the cold one is sort of made with a part A, part B mix put together to cure into a hard form. So the hot cold is how the mold itself is made, but then once they're made, they both are the same and they both do the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Anybody else?
Is there like a reason why you would pick one mold over the other?
Yeah. So in general, you would use a vulcanized one if you had a metal model, because the metal can withstand the heat that that the press goes through. But if you had a wax model, or if it was an organic model, or whatever you were trying to cast from would not withstand the heat from the press, then you would use a silicone mold to make that model. There are like different things to consider as well, sort of like your shrinkage. There is more shrinkage with a vulcanized, less shrinkage with a silicone one. But yeah, it sort of depends on the individual piece and sort of the complexity of the piece as well. Cool. Anybody else?
Is one mold more accurate than the other, or are they kind of both the same when you cast?
They both have the same accuracy, but obviously depending on how well the mold is made or how well the mold is cut. But the vulcanized one will shrink. So if I had, for example, it's more noticeable if you're casting rings. But so if you made a mold of your ring and in the vulcanized and then cast it, you would notice that it had maybe gone down a size, but it would not be any less accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? No? Cool, okay. So yeah, so this obviously was our last session together. I just wanted to remind you that obviously the wax packs that I've sent belong to the jewelry department. So when we're allowed back in the building, probably next year, next academic year, please don't forget to bring them back so that we can sort of reuse them. But yeah, that's all I wanted to chat about. Like I said earlier, hopefully I'll be able to join your crit this afternoon if Naomi sends me an invite. So fingers crossed. But yeah, I will leave it there if we're all good. But it's been really good to see you all. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.